So with the election coming up in the United States, fast approaching, like a week and less to go, it's hop, skip, and a jump away. One of the big things is they like to do polling to see if what Canadians feel about this upcoming election. Who would they most represent and like to see as president of the United States, being that we're neighbors and we're also the biggest trading partners. And they did a polling here, and this was released from the National Post, and they released the data saying that 64% of Canadian respondents say if they would cast a ballot, they would put their support behind Vice President Kamala Harris. So, in the article, it states, if Canadians could vote in the U.S. election, majority would choose to send Kamala Harris to the White House. In a new survey from polling firm Ledger, 64% of Canadian respondents said if they could cast a ballot, they would put their support behind Vice President Harris, while 21% would support former President Donald Trump. 15% weren't sure what they would do. Those who intend to vote Conservative in the next Canadian election were split on their hypothetical ballot would land. 45% would back Trump, while 42% said they would vote for Harris. Canadians 55 and older, Quebecers, and women were most likely to support Kamala Harris. The razor-thin race to the Oval Office is less than 2 weeks from the finish line, but following a tremendous campaign season that saw President Joe Biden remove his name from the Democratic ticket and a surge of support around Harris and 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump. So, judging from reading between the lines of just that statement and the polling data, this is kind of why there's more support for Kamala Harris in Canada than there be for Trump. Because of the rhetoric that our Canadian media outlets are just it's almost parroting the same exact rhetoric you hear on American stations, on American outlets, and the fact that Canadian outlets that used to have bureaus in the United States that would actually critique a lot of the U.S. media is no longer existing. And now you get outlets like CBC, CTV, Global News, the National Post here, Toronto Star, just parroting the exact wording and verbatim of the United States without any real accountability. And the fact that they're using the rhetoric of Joe Biden, stepped down, he did the most greatest sacrifice, without any mention of the fact that they couped him. That was the Democratic insiders couped Joe Biden so that they could put Kamala Harris on the ticket, who they've always wanted to be on the ticket. Ever since that video got leaked out of Martha's Vineyard, Barack Obama's estate, where they said that Harris was going to be the next president. That's always been their pick. That's always been the deep state's pick. And they just needed to find a way. And Joe Biden slipping up at that last debate, showing his dementia, was the opportunity for them to coup in and usher in Kamala Harris. So it goes on to say 70% of Canadian respondents in this new poll were interested in the current U.S. election, with liberal voters and people 55 and older more likely to be gripped by the American political saga. The U.S. is Canada's closest neighbor and largest trading partner. More than 77% of Canadian exports go to the United States, and 60% of Canada's gross domestic product is derived from trade. Both Republicans and Democrats have protectionist policies that would have rippled effects on Canada. Trump proposed a 10% across-the-board tariff as a centerpiece of his agenda. A report found from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce suggests the Republican leaders' suggested duties would reduce the size of the economy between 0.9% and 1%, resulting in around $30 billion per year in economic costs. It's expected Harris would follow the path laid by President Biden, who kept tariffs from the first Trump administration despite promises to reverse them. Harris is also likely to continue the Biden administration's Buy American procurement rules. But considering the fact that all the jobs are in China and they want to go to war with China, that kind of ruins that point. Harris has campaigned on her vote against the Canadian-U.S.-Mexico agreement, saying it did not do enough to protect American workers and the environment. Both the Republicans and Democrats have said they would push a review of the trilateral trade pact in 2026. 62% of Canadians said they would believe that a Harris victory would be the best outcome for Canada. Canadians respondents to the poll believes Harris would perform better than Trump on all issues, particularly climate change, trade relations with Canada, immigration, and the U.S. economy. Well, I hate to be the Debbie Downer of things. I hate to burst the bubble of people. But given the fact that because we're the largest trading partners, and this is why I feel that this is an important election, why Canadians should be interested in American politics as much as their own politics. Given the fact that we're the largest trading partner with them, we're so tied with the United States, and the United States dollar is crumbling compared to the BRICS nations, that's very concerning. That's very concerning because if the U.S. dollar plummets, then our dollar is also going to take effect. Just like how in 2008, when they had the financial crash of homeowners and the housing bubble burst in 2008, Canada also followed into that same trap. They've also went down a downward spiral. Not as much as America, thank God, but we still also felt the burn of that. So, respondents also said they believe the vice president would do better with national security and the current conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East. So, in other words, to sum up the last few paragraphs there, Kamala Harris is the best thing for the globalist agenda. The continuation of the globalist agenda, the war machine, the neoliberal, neocon, aristocratic agenda is all signed for Kamala Harris. And that's why people want, because they want the same as usual. They want the new boss the same as the old boss, the continuation. They don't want to actually transform or reform or do anything valuable for people. They just want to continue on the chaos as usual because chaos is best for the establishment. Chaos is best for the globalist regime. Most Canadians, 65%, were worried about potential violence and uncertainty surrounding the outcome of the election, including myself. Concerning the fact that they're bringing on psychiatrists on morning shows to comfort the nation after the election. Because you know for a fact that Trump supporters and Kamala supporters, there's going to be a huge emotional tidal wave when the results come in. And they got to find a way to console those people before we end up going into the purge. So that's not a joke. That's not a joke. That's not a hyperbole. That's something even I feel when they bring on psychiatrists. Trump has refused to publicly commit to accepting the results of the upcoming White House election. He recently called the January 6th attack when his supporters stormed Capitol Hill after his 2020 loss a day of luck. So again, because the Canadian media is just parroting everything the United States has been saying, that is why they're pushing for Kamala Harris. That is why the outcome of Canada, even though we're supposed to not be as propagandized as the United States, at least that's what I thought, turns out we're exactly like them because it's all interlooped into the same narrative, the same globalist regime agenda, the same deep state narrative that they want to parrot here into Canada, and why our politicians act similar ways to the American politicians and the UK politicians and the Australian politicians. You notice how they act all very similar with the same policies? Yeah, that's because the people above them control them. While most Canadians have an interest in the outcome of their close neighbor's election, it doesn't mean that they will be watching it all play out. 42% say they would not be watching election night, but will follow the results after. 15% have no interest at all. The Ledger poll gathered input from 1,500 Canadian adults in an online survey between October 18th and 21st. The poll cannot be assigned a margin of error because online surveys are not considered truly random samples. So they're taking this data that is a bit questionable, and they're just rolling with it. They're rolling the fact that Kamala Harris is getting the support by majority of Canadians, even though a lot of this is very sketchy. A lot of it's very sketchy. There's no real accountable media to counteract the propaganda of America, and they're just parroting what they're hearing down there to up here. And also the fact that they just said at the bottom of this article here that it's an online survey. They only did it in a couple days, and they only gathered a certain percentage of Canadians. Like, it doesn't give a fair representation. And also, where exactly is a lot of this polling data coming from? Is it coming from rural communities? Is it coming from mostly, metropolitan areas like Toronto or Vancouver? There's no real answer to how they did this polling data. So for an article to just come out and be like, well, majority of Canada supports Kamala Harris when it's only just over 1,500 people, it's not a fair representation. And considering the fact that you turn on our Canadian media, and it's very similar to the United States, they talk about January 6th being the worst thing awful, which it isn't. You can do a full deep dive. You can look at our videos. You can look at other people's investigations and tell right away that it's not the Pearl Harbor. It's not the 9/11 attacks. That January 6th was a psyop done by the FBI to, again, impose measures to restrict Donald Trump and his movement and try to penalize that movement, penalize half the country, which is very similar to what the trucker movement was about and how they reacted to that. So, again, you notice how politicians, media outlets, they all kind of act in this most similar way, regardless of where they are located, regardless of who owns them. It's almost like there's a higher force. There's almost like there's this kind of global cabal of billionaires that don't really operate to any country, don't really respond to any legal restriction. They just do what they do. They just want to occupy the world and take control and decimate on its people. Of course, 10 years ago, I would have said that would be crazy, but now it's for certain that's what's happening.